Welcome, everyone. I am Tanya Kinchelo. As a board member, vice president of Trusted Mentors, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us for the Trusted Mentors Lunch and Learn Speaker Series 2022. We hope you enjoy learning at your lunch wherever you are. If you are inspired during today's presentation, I ask that you tell someone you know about Trusted Mentors. Post on your social media sites and tell your friends and family. Help us get the word out about our programs. We also invite you to join us at our Fresh Start Restart on June 4th. We'll put the link into the chat for more information. This bike run walk fundraiser event is a fun afternoon ending with a after party at Chef JJ's downtown. We want to thank our sponsors, Anthem Medicaid, for their support of Trusted Mentors at this event. Just a housekeeping item. All participants will be muted with cameras off during today's presentation. All questions can be entered into the chat room. Trusted Mentors seeks to provide a welcoming and inclusive environment free from all forms of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. We are committed to an atmosphere that encourages free expression and the exchange of ideas. Trusted Mentors reserves the right to remove any participant whose comments are deemed discriminatory or inappropriate. Trusted Mentors connects trained volunteer mentors who build powerful relationships with at-risk adults. In the process, helping those individuals stay housed, out of jail, and live in stable lives. Whether someone has recently been homeless, is a youth transitioning to adulthood, or a formerly incarcerated individual attempting to reintegrate into society, acknowledging the inequity that they face and working to rectify it is something that Trusted Mentor has done masterfully. We understand that finding employment or a place to live or reuniting with estranged family members is the first step. Personally, I am an experienced mentor and understand the challenges people face to stay housed. In my professional life, I am a real estate broker who works to sell houses. I know in real terms the value of owning your own home. I can say that mentors assist in moving a person forward by providing the additional knowledge needed to achieve stability. Recent events have made the inequities of racism more visible. There is a growing need to better understand the reality of racism and its effects upon individuals. This year at our Lunch and Learn series, Trusted Mentors desires to unpack the experience of racial trauma and how it affects both individuals and the systems we live within. Our speaker today is Gretchen Greer. Gretchen is the current director of foster care and kinship care for the Indiana Department of Child Services. She has worked for the Department of Child Services for 29 years and in her current role for 3 years. In her 29 years with the DCS, she has held various positions, starting as a family case manager, then moving to a supervisor, policy analyst, foster parent support and communication liaison, to her present role as director. She has extensive direct service engagement with at-risk children and families and has worked with many children and families from diverse backgrounds and diverse communities. In her current role, she works to build community partnerships to support children and families, implement agency initiatives, policy and practice, and to develop strategies to enhance the foster care division and implement quality improvement efforts. Gretchen is a current member of the agency's Racial Equity and Inclusion Advisory Board, where she facilitates the policy and practice work group that is charged with developing and implementing systematic changes within agency policy and practice that supports equity and inclusion for all families that come into contact with the Department of Child Services, as well as policies that affect DCS. We welcome Gretchen today as she speaks about aging out of foster care and why race matters. All right, Gretchen, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm so excited to be here. As I get prepared to share my screen, I want you all to bear with me and understand that I am by no means a technical expert, but I will do my best to to facilitate this in a way that gives you some context. I do want to say that what I will be sharing with you today is just a small snippet of this complex subject. While race is very significant in this discussion, we do know that there are other factors that impact the outcomes of children that are aging out of foster care. I want to start with the purpose of the presentation, which is to understand how systematic and institutional racism factors into child welfare and foster care. And also the purpose of the presentation and me being here with you all this afternoon is really to open the doors of communication between not only our internal partners, but our external partners, so that we can all have some honest discussions about anti-racism, diversity, inclusion, and racial identity. What we are trying to accomplish is to make inclusion, diversity, and equity an integral part of our work. We don't want this to be the newest and latest thing, the newest and latest buzzword, but to really embrace this as part of the work that we all do. And the other thing that we want to accomplish is really eradicate systematic bias and inequity in the child welfare and foster care systems. How will we accomplish these goals? First, it starts with what we're doing today, which is educating ourselves and others on the issues regarding race equity. It will also take all of us to create and implement innovative solutions, increase awareness of racial disparity and disproportionalities. When you talk about aging out of foster care, I have a question. When you turned 18, did you still need your parents or an adult figure in your life to guide you? Now, I know that the answer should be absolutely a resounding yes to that question. So think about children aging out of foster care at 18 or even at 21 who have no supportive adult or parental figure to help them navigate adulthood. Imagine that. I believe it's a terrifying experience. When we were all 18, when I was 18, I went to college and I had my parents available and I had other supportive adults who I could depend on. And what we find in children aging out of foster care is that they don't have that. When you talk about aging out of foster care, you're talking about emancipating from the system for which you may have been in for a significant period of time. We have children coming into the system at age 12 or 14, and so they've spent the last 4 to 6 years in foster care, and then they age out of a system with no supportive adult in their lives, caregiver, or permanent family. Across the country, we're talking about 20,000 youth who age out of foster care each year. And the outcomes for these children, youth, young people aging out are absolutely sobering. But to understand this issue, you have to go back to the beginning, because this story really begins at the front end of our foster care and child welfare system. This story begins at those critical decision points that get families involved in our system. The report, that come in to Child Protective Services about families, the assessments that happen with regard to those families that are being reported to our child welfare system, and the decisions to remove children from their families. So it begins at the beginning of our system. And so when you talk about children of color, we know that the number of children in foster care and involved in the child welfare system is disproportionately those children and families of color. At the national level, we have the highest rates of African American families overrepresented in the child welfare system. They are overrepresented in the number of reports that are called into our hotlines. And Indiana has the 5th highest rate among states for reports to child welfare. And 68% of the reports that are called in for African-American families have some action taken on them. And this is the highest amongst all of our neighboring states. Those are just some of the facts. The other facts, when you talk about African-American children, children and families of color, they're more likely to have a report called into the hotline. They're more likely to have a child in need of services case resulting in removal higher than any of their peers of any other nationality, white, Hispanic, any other race. And they're more likely to be in a non-family foster home. People who have no idea of their culture, their ethnicity, their family background, or anything. And children of color are 1.5 times more likely to be placed in a residential setting. And this is not for factors that require them to have residential treatment. These are because those are the only beds available. And so they are more likely to be placed in residential settings, or that their behaviors as a result of the trauma of being removed from foster care is deemed a qualifier for a residential setting. And the other thing is that we know the length of time to emancipation is longer for children of color. So again, if you have a child coming into the system at 9, 12, 14, they are spending the bulk of their childhood in a system that may or may not be addressing their needs, and then they're aging out, and we are saying to them, be successful adults. Some of the other facts that are important here, when you talk about the makeup of the child welfare staff and employees that work with youth and families, African-American employees make up 24% compared to 58% of child welfare workers. Why is that important? That is important because research states that when you have employees and staff who look like the families that they are engaging with, there are better outcomes in terms of engagement, in terms of collaboration, in terms of working together to find solutions to either keep children at home or find solutions with other family members that may be able to help them. What this statistic says is that the majority of families of color are coming in contact with white or other ethnic employees who do not understand their cultural and ethnic needs, or who may not be sensitive to their cultural and ethnic needs. So that's important for that reason. The other thing is, we know that our Hispanic communities, their origins, 15% of them We have employees that are only 15%. And so with the growing Hispanic community across the country, what that means is that they do not engage with workers who are bilingual. There may be struggles with having resources and materials in their language so that they can understand. We may have families that need interpreters, and it's very difficult to find those because they're limited numbers. And so this becomes important again when you start talking about the factors that contribute to the disparities and the factors that then begin to go into some of the things that our youth will face as they age out of the foster care system. So when you talk about some of the other factors that contribute to racial disparity and disproportionality, again, we're just scratching the surface, and we know that there are other factors that play into this in addition to race. But one of the factors is that we know that the high rates of poverty is a major factor. While we have done a lot of work to eliminate poverty as the only reason for involvement within our system, we know that there is still 87% rate of children being removed, of children of color being removed from their families because of poverty. Some of the other issues that come into why the disproportionality and disparities happen is because of racial biases exhibited by individuals. These may be intentional or unintentional by caseworkers or mandated reporters. And so we know that plays into it. There are also child welfare system factors that play into it. So we know that there are lack of resources for families of color, of diverse racial backgrounds, lack of resources for Hispanic families. And so backgrounds of those employees who come into contact with those families. We also know that there are policy and legislation issues, policies that don't help us meet the needs of families, or policies that have unintended consequences on families of color. And then the institutional and structural racism that is embedded within the child welfare system from historical policies and from those cultural dynamics. And then another factor is the high incarceration of Black parents, and that resulting in family separation and the impact of those families. So these are some of the contributing factors to why we have a disparate number of children of color. And again, this starts to highlight then those things that happen along the continuum of the child welfare system as you talk about kids aging out of the system. We know that we have difficulty placing children in foster homes, youth and teens between the age of 9 and 12. And so it becomes imperative that we do everything we can to keep those children connected to family. But so when you look at the aging out of children out of foster care and the outcomes for youth of color, you begin to see where the challenges come in. Children aging out of foster care experience higher unemployment rates. They live below the poverty line. So this begins to then set up that generational system of families that we see come in the child welfare system, because poverty is used as a qualifier. In a lot of cases, they get you reported to the child welfare system. And then you have 5% will become incarcerated within 2 years of aging out of the system. We have higher dropout rates. Less than 3% earn a college degree. So these are some of the outcomes. And then the biggest one is that 20% will experience instant homelessness. So when we do not have children that are connected with a caring adult, who do not have a supportive family member, who are not able to maintain employment or have employment enough to afford housing, then we have 20% of those youth become instantly homeless. So these are some of the sobering outcomes for aging out of our system. Some of the others are 60% of young women will end up in the sex industry. I don't know if you all know that human trafficking and sex trafficking is pretty huge in the Midwest. And so 60% of young women will end up in that industry because, again, they don't have caring adults or permanent families. 70% will be pregnant by the age of 21. And then we have 25% of youth that are dealing with PTSD and have no access to medical care or mental health services. Not only do they not have access, those that don't know how to navigate the system in order to use those services that may be available to them. It's difficult even for us professionals to be able to navigate that system. So if we have not prepared our young people for that, it is a massive undertaking for them to get the services that they need. So when we talk about all of those things, the impact of the disproportionality of youth of color in the system, the reasons that they come into our system, that leads to why that they age out of our system, and why it takes why they spend so much time in our system before they age out, and the fact that they do not have a caring, supportive adult. We begin to then move into the question, why does race matter? Race matters because we know that children and families of color will have an intersection with other systems that are also riddled with the effects of institutional racism and other systems that are disparate to people of color. Why is that important? It's important because it makes it difficult and challenging for people then to be able to be independent and support themselves, because the other systems, housing, the challenge of the high rate of rent, the challenge of finding decent housing, that people can have a decent way of living, the healthcare system. Our children have been through extreme trauma, complex trauma, and so they definitely need access to healthcare and mental health services. We know that these children have been in foster care or experienced foster care, and that has some adverse experiences associated with them. Children have been in foster care through some of those highly brain development parts of their lives that have been impacted by trauma, which again leads to some challenges as you transition to adulthood. Also, why does race matter? Race matters because of the lasting effects on generations of families of color, and on the communities that those families are a part of, and on the community at large. because when you have one race of people that is struggling and to be successful, it calls into question the health of the community, and it calls into question the health of those families. And then the other thing, why race matters. Race matters here because it's going to affect how we improve outcomes for youth of color. How do we establish a better system that allows for us to provide some solutions to connect children who will age out of the system? We know that we will have a percentage of children who age out of the system, but we have to, develop a better way to connect them with caring adult figures who they can rely on for support, for guidance. And sometimes it might just be for $20. I mean, when my kids were in college or whatever, it might be, I just need gas money. It might be, I need a reference to a job. All of those things that help people become successful adults. These are the places where our children in foster care find the most difficulty because of the complex trauma, because of inherent biases that are within the system, and the institutional racism that impacts all of the other areas that help us to be successful adults. When you talk about what now, what can we do? Certainly us meeting together today for lunch is certainly a big part of the now what, because we all have to be aware. We all have to become knowledgeable about what is happening in our community, what is happening with our youth. We must address implicit bias, and we must address it everywhere. So we have to talk about what that looks like within our Indiana foster care system. We have to talk about what that looks like with our juvenile justice system. We have to talk about what that looks like in our educational system. These are all the places where our children will find intersections as they begin to age out, or as they navigate through that continuum of being involved in the child welfare system. We also can provide safe spaces for families and for employees and our stakeholders, safe places to have this type of discussion, to talk about the impacts of power and privilege, to talk about what that has meant to families of color, to talk about how there have been some distinct disadvantages to families of color, to talk about the overrepresentation of children in the system because they are surveilled more than other families because of poverty, because of lack of education, because of any number of reasons, because of the neighborhood that they live in. Again, this is a complex issue that has a lot of facets to it, but we have to be able to talk about those things in a safe space and engage so that we can all work together. Now what? Identify policies and practices. I work on the Department of Child Services Racial Equity and Advisory Board, and I facilitate the policy group. And so we're talking about how can we look at our policies through a racial equity lens? How can we look at our policies through a lens of inclusiveness? How can we look at our policies so that we can address any unintended harms that may happen to families of color, families that experience disabilities, or families of other racial ethnicities or LGBTQ. There are other areas where our policies impact and cause unintended harm. And so How can we review each step of our process, of our processes within child welfare? We have made some significant changes that is trying to diminish poverty as being a number one qualifier to rule in a family for an assessment and rule in a family for removal. We're working hard to engage with families to support them and provide them the necessary resources that they need to keep children at home. How can we develop approaches that eliminate social and structural barriers that create disparate outcomes for young people of color? And then the other thing, how can we help young adults navigate those external systems that lead to successful independence? You and I probably had the advantage of having our parents take us to the bank and show us how to open up a bank account. You took your first birthday money, your $5, they said you had to keep $5 and open a bank account. And they took you to the bank and they showed you those things. Our children in foster care, they get some financial literacy, but it's so far down the line that you have to, at 14 now or at 17, you're learning what it means to have a bank account. You're learning what it means to save money. When children who have intact families, who've been able to stay with their family members, learn these things at much earlier ages. We need to figure out how we can build those core skills of our youth of color so they can be successful community members and productive citizens in the workforce. This is all important for us to have a healthy community. And so when we talk about engaging from a racial lens, what can we do? We talk about a call to action. We have to have sustainable change that transcends any leadership change. So when I exit from this position, we have to have change that can still stand and that the next person can pick that up and continue to contribute to better outcomes for youth of color who are aging out of the system. We have to continue to drive for solutions. We don't all have the answers, but together we can work and try to find the best answers. How can we engage culturally insensitive to families of color? How can we be more inclusive to all people? How can we be inclusive with our stakeholders? I'm so excited that you all invited me to be with you today so I could learn more about the mission and the vision of Trusted Mentors, and so how we can work together to provide a safety net and network for our youth who are aging out of the system, and point them to a resource that is supportive and give them some guidance. Is community engagement and partnerships for quality improvement. We have a lot of resources, particularly in Indianapolis. There are a lot of resources, but what I've found through my work is that I may know one person for a particular resource, but I don't know the other people. How do I get at the table to really talk about some of the visions and the ideas that we have so that we can work together to pull those together? So community engagement and partnership is really important. And then we want to talk about multidisciplinary representation. It really matters, you know, when you see somebody who looks like you. Our families have a different reaction sometimes and a different response when they see somebody of color at their door, because at least they have a feeling that that person might understand their experience. That person might know what it feels like to be poor, what it's like to, you know, stretch the dollars to feed your children and do the best that you can. Representation matters in our educational system, so that children are able to see that they're educators of color and healthcare providers. And then these stakeholders also can then become partners to help our families move forward. And when you talk about calling to action, how can we develop more operational strategies? People have stated that we've been doing a lot of talking. We've been doing a lot of talking about racial equity and disparity. Folks have been talking about they're tired of talking. Can we do something? So we have to start thinking about what those operational strategies might be. And we need to talk about not just contributing to racial justice. While yes, it is important to educate each other, it's important to have the conversation, but we have to be intentional and lead with this work. We have to not just talk about it. We have to not let this just be an initiative, but it has to be ingrained in our practice. It has to be what we intrinsically do. And so those are just some of the things about engaging from a racially just lens. I want to leave or finish my presentation with this quote from Amanda Gorman. We know how amazing she is as a poet. And if you've not seen her book, you should get her children's book. But her quote is, "Whether we prevail is not determined by all the challenges that are present, but by all the change that is possible." And I certainly believe that. I am committed to continuing this work. I'm passionate about foster care. I'm passionate about working with families and with youth and with children. And so that's what I'll leave you with this afternoon. And I hope that just this snapshot of information that I've given you today will give you some insight into where we are currently with children and youth aging out of foster care, but also give you some fire and some energy and some hope about what we can do moving forward and how we can change the narrative and how we can improve outcomes for young people. You're muted, Tanya.
There you go. All right. Thank you, Gretchen. That was powerful and informative. Oh, just a reminder, you can put your questions into the chat and we'll take a few minutes to answer your questions. I think what stuck out to me was 20,000 kids aging out of foster care. That is a lot. So I guess one of my questions is, how can we as people serve as allies for young adults that are aging out of foster care?
Well, what we know is that the significance of having a caring adult in your life and a consistent and committed caring adult. Young people have to have somebody they can go to. If it's not just to vent, if it's to somebody to cry to, somebody to say, I don't know how to navigate this system. Can you help me? I don't know how to answer these questions on this application. Can you help me? So we know that mentorship is huge and it's important. But deeper than that, we know that mentorship has to have some type of connection with a young person so that they feel comfortable to bring their challenges to you, so that they feel comfortable in sharing and saying to you that, you know, I struggle with reading. I know I graduated from high school, but I still struggle. And so that mentorship and that relationship is really, really important. We have children aging out of the system that have no connection to any caring adult, and they are left to figure this out on their own.
Okay, all right. My next question is, how does Indiana compare to neighboring states in the area of foster care?
So Indiana has consistently ranked among the 5 highest states in the nation for foster care and removal. And we are the highest with 10 removal and placements per 1,000 children. And the country is 6. So we are higher than any of our neighboring states, and we have consistently been in the top 5 in the nation.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so questions from the chat room. What are the numbers for Asian children placed in care and percentage of staff?
So the number of Asian children is small compared to other ethnicities. It's about 1.2%, and staff even smaller. I mean, less than 1%.
Wow. Okay. Next question. Are there similar challenges with the new immigrant non-speaking English families and children given the strong influence of poverty?
So the numbers for Hispanic and Latinx are lower than children of color, but the outcomes are the same for those children that do come into care. When you talk about the Hispanic and Latinx community, though, it's geographical too. So if you look at a place like California, they are overrepresented as well with their Hispanic community. Indiana, not so much. So it depends on where the numbers are. Our Hispanic community certainly is not as large as California, so that would account for some of the disparities. But they come into the system with the same amount of poverty level and the same amount of disparate outcomes when you talk about housing and access to service, and in particular finding resources in their first language.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so the next question is, we have found that our young African-American male sex offenders, mentees, have great challenges in maintaining a mentee-mentor relationship. Our feeling, if we need to partner with mental health resources. Do you have recommendations on how to accomplish this partnering with the right kind of mental health resource?
So I think it starts with our community mental health providers, to tap into them and see if they have any particular programming that could engage young men of color. We know, period, in the African-American community, speaking about mental health has for years been not something that we have really wanted to acknowledge has been part of our culture, not something that we've wanted to talk about as something that affects us. And so we certainly would see that show up in our males as well. I think the bigger part of that in connecting with those community mental health agencies is really try to speak to how we can engage that group of young people. Sometimes it's not just about being Black, but certainly that is the initial draw that could get our young Black males at the table. But we know that young people are really big on authenticity, about being real, and about being genuine. And so we have to keep that in mind when we are developing programs and we are bringing people in to be a part of those programs to engage young people.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. Next question, how does poverty and racism affect our understanding of safety that might lead to removal from the home?
So there are definitions about safety, but when you talk about implicit bias, when you talk about that being in the background of then that can color what safety looks like for you or me or someone else. So while poverty is a condition, and I may be in poverty, does that really mean that my children are unsafe? So there's some other questions that you need to ask. So I may not have a six-figure job. I may make $20,000 a year or be below the poverty line and have 5 children. But do my children eat every day? And does it matter what they eat? So is it okay that they eat a peanut butter sandwich versus having chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans? Do they have clothes on their back? They don't have to be new. So if I went to the Goodwill, does that mean that they're unsafe? So there are other questions that we need to ask. If I have 5 children, I'm a single mom and I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment, does that mean that they are unsafe? It may mean that we might be uncomfortable or that we might be a tight-knit family in a small space, but it doesn't mean that we're unsafe. And so when you start looking at those things that surround poverty, you can't just look at I'm below the poverty line and my family's on food stamps, or we get some other type of public assistance and therefore it makes my family safe. You have to ask those additional questions, and you have to understand what safety means. We have to be sure that kids' basic needs are being met, that there's no physical abuse happening, that we have to understand what culturally what corporal punishment means in families of color. So is that I got a spanking or was that abuse? So you have to do a better assessment of those things, and don't just let, because I live in a place that you may not live, that means my children are unsafe.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. We talked about Hispanic and African American. What about Afghan and Chinese refugees?
We don't have a lot of data on that population. We know that we have some in Indiana, and they usually come through the refugee and immigrant services door. But we don't have a lot of that population involved in our child welfare system as a whole.
Okay, all right. I think this is the last question. Is it possible to have a copy of the presentation with data reference? I would like to reference this information, but I'm not sure where the data or information provided could be located.
So a lot of our data comes from our data sharing system that we have within the Department of Child Services. But one of the places that all of you all can get data and information from, and it's one of our partners, is the Indiana Youth Institute. So the 2022 Indiana Kids Count Data Book. And so you can get the data there. It will tell you about where we are in Indiana 2022. It also has the data listed there as well for 2021.
Okay. Is there any way that we could partner with DSS to get grants to help find solutions through mentoring? I think that was one of the questions.
With DCS. So we have, absolutely, there's ways to partner with DCS. We have a division of collaborative care that works with young adults and works to prepare them to age out of the system, and works with them on extended foster care benefits. That helps those that are ready and ready to enroll in higher education, and to help them get college paid for. So certainly you can partner with us, and we have a whole department that works to help. So we would certainly love to have some of you partner with us, bring some solutions, and work with us as we continue to develop some innovative programs and talk about how we can do some better solution building and all of that for our young people. Absolutely. And one of the other things is in your role and in your line of work, if you don't have any young people as part of your advisory boards, as part of your councils for feedback, think about doing that. We have young people involved in our racial equity board. They have a whole group, and they are spread amongst all of our work groups. We have them working. They have a youth advisory council. And so they can give feedback to our agency about policies and procedures that they believe that should be changed and that have been disparate to youth and families of color. So if you haven't started to engage young people in the conversation and bring them into your agencies to have a voice, I would encourage you to do that.
Okay. This is some powerful information and very informative, and they are loving it because the questions are still rolling in. So 2 more questions just rolled in.
Okay.
Real quick, 20,000 age out of the US or in Indiana?
20,000. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Do most children aging out stay connected to their foster families?
So 20,000 aging out in the country as a whole. About 4,000 to 6,000 in Indiana. And these children have, they have severed relationships with their families. And so when they age out, they have either not seen their parents for several years. Parents may be incarcerated, have no idea where they are. They have strained relationship with family members because they may have at one time been taken in by a family member, and then they don't understand the trauma and the needs of the child. And so all they can see is bad behaviors and bad children, instead of understanding that trauma will exhibit itself in negative behaviors. And so they do not have relationships with their families. But that's the first place I will tell you that children want to go back to. No matter how severe and how bad the situations are, they want to go and reconnect with their families. But again, they don't have any resources or caring adults that can help them navigate how to rebuild those relationships.
Okay. Does mentoring with those aging out of foster care start before they age out, or is it after they age out?
It starts before, and some children have, and young people have an opportunity to maintain those relationships afterwards. It's understandable that children have had some bad experiences, and so they're not, as always, trusting of adults in their lives, so they have difficulty trusting and maintaining trust-based relationships. And so it's important that as mentors, if those young people fall off, or they don't connect as often as they did when they're in the system. It always helps, like in church, you go see the sick and shut in, you call folk, you check on them or whatever. It's important that we do that with our young people. I'm just calling to check to see how you are. I haven't talked to you in a few months. I wanted to see how school was going. Wanted to see, was there anything I could assist you with? Because the young people, they struggle with maintaining those relationships. And it's not because, it may not be because of anything that we said or done or whatever. It's because over the time that they've had a difficult people coming in and out of their lives, and they just have a hard time trusting and finding a way to be resilient and to maintain those relationships.
All right, well, you have educated us as well as touched our hearts. And this was so good, especially since the disparity within the African American community is so prevalent. It makes me eager to do more, said one of our guests. So, all right, well, I think that's all the questions we have. Let me check to be sure. I don't want to miss anyone. Okay, yeah, that was it. So we want to extend our sincere thanks to Gretchen and their perspective. She wait a minute. Oh, that wasn't a question. Okay. And the perspective she presented today. If you were inspired during this lunch and learn to assist young adults aging out of foster care, please consider becoming a mentor. Also, I invite you to tell someone you know about Trusted Mentors. Post on your social media page, tell a friend, family, coworker, doctor, dentist, you get the idea. Help us get the word out about our programs. And there's more information at trustedmentors.org. And as a reminder, please plan to join us for our Fresh Start Restart Bike Walk Run event on June the 4th. We want to have a new fresh start in this fun peer-to-peer fundraising event. Our third Lunch and Learn series is on August the 24th. So mark your calendars, August the 24th. And our speaker will be Jeff Korzenik, and he will be speaking on second chance hiring. Thank you all so much for attending. And Gretchen, thank you for that great, powerful, shocking, but very needed information.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate your time this afternoon.